This is Duke University.
Tell me, what stands out to you from your time at Duke?
Well, we had great teachers. We had wonderful teachers. They ranged from the very severe and non-communicative, communicative, and sort of scary. They were great. They were entertaining. You know, when you come from undergraduate, you're really sort of thrown in the deep, and it's like a very different process. Nobody's looking over you, and so there was a little adjustment time, I think, for me. But you know, eventually I got very interested in Shakespeare because of George Williams, who was there, George Walton Williams at the time, and largely because he was so witty and it was just so much fun in Shakespeare class. So I came in and I was going to do Faulkner, and I had a wonderful teacher, Bernard Duffy was his name. He was wonderful. But we were doing Sound and the Fury, and he kept talking about how Faulkner was, you know, sampling Shakespeare all the time, and I guess I finally thought, well, you know, if Faulkner is so into Shakespeare, I'll be into Shakespeare too. So that's, but at the same time, I had George doing a great job, and we had a wonderful group of graduate students who were all starting families. You know, that was a real big difference, I think. It wasn't, we were learning to be friends with people where we weren't just thinking about ourselves, we were thinking about our wives and our children and what's going to happen next, and we're all doing that. So in a way, they became our best friends. I mean, we've stayed in touch remarkably over the years, I think. So it was great. It was wonderful. Oh, and North Carolina barbecue. I remember we went to, there was a place called Turnage's. I don't know if you're editing this. I hope you're going to be editing this, because I'm just going off. Turnage's. I got to tell you about Turnage's. That's before you were here, because they closed pretty soon after. It was family style, and the first time I went in, I thought I knew what barbecue was. You know, we had red sauce on it, and I thought I knew. And out came this vinegar-based thing, and I thought, that's awful. Gosh, that's just spicy. And I remember as we were leaving, thinking, actually, that was really good. Judy, can we go get a little quart of that because it was that good? And so, yeah, and so things like that, and the movie scene, and also Chapel Hill. Then that was where the restaurants were. So we were back and forth to Chapel Hill all the time.
Exactly. Yeah. You've mentioned, and you just mentioned again, that it was your class with Professor George Walton Williams that turned you on to Shakespeare. Why did that course have such a big influence on you?
Well, George was a challenge. I mean, you know, I think the first words he ever said to me were sort of to accuse me of stealing his umbrella a little bit. It was a rainy day, and I was leaving class, and he said, Mr. And he always did this thing where he seemed like he couldn't remember my name, and Mr. Cohen. Yes, Mr. Cohen. He said, that's a very nice umbrella you have there. And I said, oh, thank you very much. He said, it's very like an umbrella I had. And he said, but someone took it, and all I knew to say was, well, you have very good taste in umbrellas, and so did whoever took it. I didn't know what to say, you know. It's like, but he was also very funny and witty, and the thing is, I think he's the first time that I ever looked so specifically at the way the words would work, and what they could do, and how it mattered, and you know, and now I direct and I teach acting, and it's all in the words. And I mean, it's so in the words, and every syllable matters, and he's sort of the first one with that sort of precision, but with wit, and it was just fun. It's hard to explain what a class with him was like, but I could tell you we were all like that. Everyone was sort of immediately interested, and everyone was in the text and at every line, and it was great fun. It was great. That's mostly my memory of.
But it wasn't difficult shifting from Faulkner, Southern writer, United States, to Shakespeare.
No, you know, I mean, if you've ever read the beginning of Sound and Fury, you don't know what's going on in that. So no, it's not. It's not. I have a whole project in my life is sort of making people realize that that language is our language anyway. Shakespeare's language is 98.5% of the words in Shakespeare's plays are current English. It's not. It's just this. No, none at all. There was none at all of that, which was kind of surprising to me and delightful. So that made me feel smart.
You've mentioned the important role that your wife has played in helping you through graduate school. Talk about how she helped you.
Oh, Lord. she, and I think many of the wives, because this is a time when we're shifting from sort of a wife-based family situation with the, traditional, what were the traditional roles. But she was not only the typist and a proofreader, but she was working on East Campus. She was working for the vice president. She was, helping pay the bills, and there's this thing, I say this sometimes to my students because I use it all the time. So you got to read your paper out loud to somebody, and I didn't learn that until I was married. But saying it out loud, having some bouncing it off, and she had to listen to so many papers. She had to listen to the speech I'm doing today about 5 times. So it was. I said to her after that lovely event last night, as we were getting on the elevator, I said, this couldn't have been done. She's always doing. George was right, and as you know, he said to me at one point, when I was saying something about the formatting for the dissertation, which was extremely, I don't know if it still is. It's like, but you can do it by computer now and correct things. I mean, in those days, and you were not allowed to white over. You were not allowed to do that. So it was really painstaking work, and I said something about the formatting and how Judy wondered if, and he answered the question. He said, "Mr. Cohen, just you know the story, but Mr. Cohen, just how much of this dissertation is the St. and Mrs. Cohen responsible for?" It's this typical. It's like accusing me of stealing the umbrella. It's the same thing.
Something interesting from your bio is that you kind of had a front row seat to a key episode of the Civil Rights Movement.
Yeah.
You grew up in Montgomery, Alabama, and your father was friends with the judge Frank M. Johnson, who ruled that civil rights activists had the right to make the march from Selma to Montgomery. What did you witness during that experience?
Well, my father was always interested in the law. He was a doctor, but he was always interested in the law. And we would go sometime and sit in, and there were many other Johnson things. He's the one who made the ruling on the boycott. He was in this awful position because Eisenhower had nominated him to be the justice and the judge, but then so he's a Republican. So when Kennedy was in and when LBJ was in, they had this problem. What would they do about Johnson? Even though he was doing all this great work they believed in, they had to go. I guess they felt they had to go with the Democrat. But that was when Republican meant something really different than it does today. And it wasn't until Carter got in that he was made head of the FBI, and then he had a heart attack. I mean, didn't die, but had to withdraw. So it's kind of a weird thing. But he was a great man, and I felt like I did have a front row seat to amazing things. And my parents were very active. And my father there was a list of communists that was printed on the front page. And my father wasn't a communist, but there was all this stuff going on. The McCarthy years, all of that. And I think being in Montgomery, if you had to be someplace where everything was happening, that was a good place to be, because you're right in the middle of it, and the world was changing so much. America was changing so much in that one cauldron. It was great.
Tell us about the early days of the Shenandoah Shakespeare Express, which later became the American Shakespeare Center. How did it start? What were those performances like? Could you have envisioned the theater company growing into what it is today?
I was an English professor. No. No. I had a wonderful colleague who was in the theater department, and we taught playwriting together, so it was a way of each of us, it's a territory thing. So the English department wanted me to be in it, and the theater department wanted him to be in it. We got to be really good friends. And I had an idea about a way to deal with Taming of the Shrew that I thought would alleviate some of the issues. and he liked the idea. I was saying I'd like to put it on. The students had a place where they could put things on, and you just had to reserve it. Can I be a student, please? I said, and do this. And he says, oh, well, tell me your idea. And I told him, and so we did it together. He said, let's do it on the main stage. And I was bit by that bug. And then I started doing work in this little experimental place. And about the same time, I was running our programs in London, and I met a man named Patrick Spottiswoode, who was the new education director for Sam Wanamaker. They're building the Globe. And he started talking about the reasons to look at the Globe, to build a Globe, not for some sort of ye olde England kind of thing at all, but to find out how theater works. So like, what will we learn about theater? Not then, of course we're interested in that, but what will we learn about theater going forward? Will we write different plays? Will we, what will it teach us? And I mean, it was the first time I saw any reason for this kind of architectural retro work. It seemed like a great thing. And so I went back to James Madison, where I was working from London. I said, I got an idea. I want to do a seminar in Henry V. So Henry V, which I know you like, plays a big part in my life. Kate, you met my daughter. She's named for the princess. That's who she's named for. I just thought, that scene, the English lesson is just great. Anyhow, so it meant a lot to me, and we did a seminar on what would an original show have looked like, what would have happened, how many people would have been in it, how would it have been cast, how would things, and I actually brought in some pretty important people who were working in those fields. And one of the people who had been in a production I'd done of Antony and Cleopatra, a young man named Jim Warren, who played Enobarbus for me, I cast him as Henry, and we did this show together. And then when it was over, Jim said, "That's great." He's the one that I had to buy the two big swords.
Yes.
He's the one that said we're going to need two big swords if we're doing Richard III. So I don't even know that when we were running that Henry V, we had so much fun. Is that we, the company, had so much fun. So I think the audiences did too. Because I was in the show, I thought I should be if we were going to do the way Shakespeare did. I was a terrible actor, but I thought I don't even know if it was very good, but I know we had a good time. And Jim said, let's start a company. And so he's my co-founder. And so together we started the Shenandoah Shakespeare Express, we called it, which is still a name I love. And we just started traveling first to high schools, and then it worked. It's hard to explain how exciting it was for me. I've been telling my students for years, if you didn't take 3 hours to do the show, if you did it like he says, 2 hours traffic of the time, if you did it in 2 hours, if you could see your audience instead of turning the lights off on them, so you can watch their eyes, and you can engage them as part of the conversation, then the speeches don't seem long, because to be or not to be becomes about 30 little speeches, because you've got to be or not to be. That is the question. Find somebody else. Whether to, so that it breaks up the language, makes it easier. And it must have worked, because the kids, we go to high schools playing gymnasiums with Richard III, this play about an English king with really, really rhetorical play. And they loved it. It really was kind of very reassuring to me about Shakespeare. And so it just grew very quickly. Scholars found out what we were doing, because we were trying to pay attention to Shakespeare's stage directions as well as his words. Like everyone thinks of Shakespeare as a word genius, but he was a staging genius too. So if you pay attention to who comes in first in his stage direction, if you pay attention to the little details, you get great shows. I'm not saying it's the only way to do it, but it's reliably a good way to do it. And it must have worked. So pretty soon the scholars found out that we did a guest appearance at a Shakespeare Association with Julius Caesar, and I don't know, it just kind of took off. It was great. Jim left actually to go make his living. He was graduating to go make his living in Los Angeles, and we suddenly had so much business. I was running, and I had to call him up and say, "Come back. This is working." And so it grew pretty quickly, by 90, to 88, started in 88, and by 92 we went to Edinburgh Festival, and we went to London. Sam Wanamaker saw our 3 shows, and we were being written up. In 92 we got written up in the Shakespeare Quarterly, which was a big thing for us. So that's how it happened. It was really serendipitous, but what I love about it is it came out of love of the words. And that's why the academics were on our side. It didn't come out of technical wizardry or some new set or saying, well, let's put this in the Old West or anything like that. It came out of simply making sure our actors knew exactly what they were saying and also acknowledged they had an audience. So it's great. It's wonderful. So that was in those early days. We slept on floors. We went all over. We did a lot of. I had my late father's old truck. That's where we put our stuff in. It's like I feel like in my day we had to slog through the snow and all that sort of thing. But it really was really fresh theater, and we made a lot of impressions. I mean, we made some great impressions on people. And then it was because we were doing that we got the phone call from Stanton, Virginia, about would we be interested in working on raising the money to build a theater.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you, how do you do, after our dinner last night, I went home and of course I pulled out a DVD of Henry V, the one with Kenneth Branagh, and watched and rewatched. My husband got very, very tired of me going back and forth on St. Crispin's. How do you determine the cadence, how that speech or any of Shakespeare should be delivered from just the words?
That's the ultimate question in a way. I mean, what we do, we work really hard with our actors. First of all, I mean, there's the first and most basic thing we learned to do with our actors was that everybody in the company has to write her entire part out, where they replace all the nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs with another word they think is the same or near enough. That's really hard for some words. For example, it's really hard to say you love someone with all your heart because heart is a hard word to find another word for. So they say things like, I love you with all my blood pump. They'll. But what it does is it makes sure that everyone actually knows what they're saying. And by making it, you switch in the words, but you don't change the syntax, they have to think in the order of the language as it's going. So, for example, to be or not to be, that is the question. A good paraphrase of that would be, to exist or not to exist, that is the issue. So you've replaced your nouns, and in this case I'll let the verb is go, but so that's fine. It's not, you can't paraphrase it by saying the issue is whether or not to exist. That's not the same. It's built in a certain way, where he comes in and he says to be or not to be, and then he says, that is the question. And that brings me to the other point. If we go to the speech you're talking about, it's iambic pentameter, right? And this is a little complicated, and again, I don't know what they can cut. You're going to want some of this gone. But, oh, for a muse of fire that would ascend. Oh, for a muse of fire that would ascend. That's your first line. So an actor, so Shakespeare is telling you, particularly in the last 4 stresses, exactly what to stress. People can argue about whether it's, oh, for a muse of fire that would ascend. They can argue that. My actors can say, it's not an I am at the beginning, it is a trochee. Oh, for instead of oh, for. Or they can say, my actors can, but they have to tell me why. They have to, the actors have to have a reason. They have to, I'll let them, but I want them to know it's there. So another choice would be both of the syllables the same. Oh, for, could do that. Or you could be a real purist and go, oh, for a muse of fire, in which case the O is down and the other thing went up, right? So you could say, well, that's That doesn't solve anything because you got three choices. Yes, it does. Solves everything in the world, because by the time an actor has gone, oh, for a muse of fire, and decided on the for, he's now involved in that idea in a different way than if he had gone, oh, for a muse of fire. It's different. So you've got an actor on the way there, and the cadences have to stay, you know. All I say to them, the only thing I say to them as a director is, I'm not going to tell you, if you make a decision about your character, I might say I don't like it, but you can still do it. The only time I'm a dictator is if I can't hear it. Make me hear it and let me know why you've chosen that. So it's there, it's all there, and I'm pretty sure that's true. And there's a lot of other things we do too. A whole lot of things with language, like thee and you. In Shakespeare's day, thee and thou were familiar. They sound formal to us, but they were familiar. You would say that to the most intimate, your wife, your children, but when you were being formal, you would say you. But you would also thee and thou to inferiors. So there are moments. There's a moment in Lear when Lear is being so bad and he's got the suitors there for Cordelia, and he's being so bad that suddenly France, who marries Cordelia, goes from you, which is appropriate, to talking to the king as thou. And you can see this play. So our actors have to know stuff like that. It makes a huge difference to their performance. But there's a clarity. We're very famous for clarity of language. And actors who work for us get work elsewhere because they can always count on the fact that they know their language. Long answer.
Well, no, because my next question is, you're a teacher of Shakespeare. You hold workshops and seminars about teaching Shakespeare. You've written a book on the subject. Talk about how you approach teaching Shakespeare.
Well, we just did it in a way, so you're right, it fits. Okay, so, and I'm looking right now, I'm just going right back to the Pelican edition of Shakespeare I had when I was with George. Okay, you open any edition of Shakespeare that's complete works, and it's going to be double columns on each side, right? And so you're looking at all of this language, and it's intimidating. And we've associated Shakespeare with, like, how smart are we? You know, it's like an SAT test thing. Because the first thing we do is we show students that stuff in those columns, and yeah, I mean, I guess if you know it, some of it already, and some of our best students certainly can manage the columns, but that's not the way that text was first looked at. The first people to see that text were actors. And those actors weren't asking themselves, they were figuring out how to use the text, and that's what's fun. So our approach is to get it on its feet, and the hard thing here is, it's easy to tell theater teachers to get the Shakespeare on their feet. They're used to getting people, moving them around. The problem is, they don't teach Shakespeare in theater courses. They teach it in English courses. Getting English teachers at both the high school level and the college level to have the confidence to say, well, let's take a look at this, you know, and let them see that. Okay. So if you're doing Macbeth, is this a dagger I see before me, right? So he sees this imaginary dagger, right? Is this a dagger I see before me? It's handled toward my hand, right? Okay. The word this. If you, it's one thing to read it, but if you get a kid up and you go, well, look, it's an imaginary dagger. Where is it? And he goes, oh, it's over there. I said, then you go, okay, say the line. So if he imagines it's way over there, and he goes, he realizes this doesn't work. If it's way over there, that would be that. This is a small thing, Paula, but it's huge for a kid to discover that. You give me a kid who learns 3 or 4 lines and really understands all the information that they're getting by doing, and that they don't, and it's like this magic trick, because while you're asking them to do something, they are looking at words like this and that they know perfectly well. They stop looking at anything they might think was archaic, but, well, of which there is actually very little. They stop looking at that because they have to solve this problem. And a kid who realizes this means it's really close, and if the handle's toward your hand, then that means You know, if it wasn't the handle and there was a dagger there, you'd have to do it like that. But if it's like that, then your hand is going to go like that as you try to clutch it. And it actually says, let me clutch thee, right? And so then you say to the kid, well, when do you do that? Do you say, let me clutch thee? Or do you go, let me clutch thee? Or do you go, let me clutch thee? In other words, there's three choices there. And so you're no longer talking, they're no longer worrying about their damn vocabularies, and that's not happening anymore. Now something else is happening, and they are so in it. And if you can get, and so it's one thing that we can do this with kids easily. I mean, whenever we do workshops, we've got them to. It's teaching high school teachers to feel confident doing that kind of work, looking at the stage directions, and trusting that getting through one scene where everybody's really got it is worth, studying the whole play. I always say, look at the Cliff Notes. I don't care. I don't care. Look at it. You get the joy of this moment, and we got you. Shakespeare's got you. Get the joy of one moment, and Shakespeare's got you. And the way to do that is truly to remember he was writing for actors. And if you work it that way, it changes everything, I promise you.
I guess it hadn't dawned on me that he really was writing for actors, not as kind of literature per se, which is what we think of it now.
No, it didn't. It didn't see print till long after. And you know how you got it? You got it with a Q script. So what you would get, because the mimeograph machines were all, and the Xerox machines, they're all broken, right? So what he would do is he would write a manuscript, then they'd send it to a scribe. The scribe would put it into what's called fair copy, right? And then they would come back to the stage manager, and it was his job to give they didn't want to write the play if they had, say, 15 actors 15 times. They would just give you your cue and your lines. So they don't, so you just have the last three words of the prior and your lines. And then your job is to go off and memorize that and know when your cues were. And you go, wow, that's odd. How did that work? Well, imagine rehearsals, because you've got, when you're supposed to speak, but what if there are three other people on stage? You don't know who's got that line. You don't know whose cue it is. You've only got your own line. It doesn't tell you who's saying the other words. It's just yours. And we do this with students all the time. It's amazing. And this is what happens in a rehearsal. It's just great because, I'm looking at the camera person now, and I'm looking at you, right? And I know I've got some lines to say, but I don't know which of you is going to give me the cue. So I'm looking at you while you're talking, because so I'm really into that. And it looks on stage as though you are just so in the moment. And then as soon as you start talking and you didn't give me the cue, I look over there and I wait for him. And then if and I'm waiting. And sometimes, and it's so great. And when finally you got your cue, this is what always happens too. You come in so energetically. There it is. Boom. And it lifts it's great. Yeah, he was doing, and he knew that. He knew that. When we look at changes in his text, he would revise things and be folio copy and quarto copy, and they've got all these words for it. It's an industry how he edited his text. But what we know for sure, whole speeches would change except for the cue, because actors in the company had to have their cue. So other actors needed that cue. So the last words would not change. It's stuff within the speech, but no big deal. But it's about the other actor waiting for his cue. And so you can look at these reviews and you'll see that lots of changes within, but when it gets that cue, it's the same.
Amazing.
It is kind of as nerdy as you can be, but it's great.
What advice would you have for students graduating today, whether it's PhD in English or economics?
I read a statistic that is amazing, and I checked it I checked it against some other statistics. I mean, I looked it up in other places. That is to say, I Googled it in several places. And it is that the average American now has 6 careers, not jobs. Careers. I kept thinking that word was wrong. So, the first thing I would say is know all you can about what you're studying. I mean, that's great. And be open to any moments that have some other path involved in them. I mean, just be open, because the delight is things changing. I mean, that's the delight. Everything is changing really fast. And what you got if you graduated from here is you have all the necessary skills of research and expression and discipline, which means you're going to be great at whatever you were working on, and that would be wonderful. But you also have to realize that whatever you're working on is going to be shifting really, and you have to just be joyous about that. You've got to go, great, let's try that too. I think that, and I mean, I'm speaking out of my own experience. The thing I do that I still love the best is teach. But I direct, I helped build a building, I did a lot of other things, and I had a professor at Duke, and I'm not going to say his name because there was also some bad stuff about the guy. I mean, just not with me, but you know, it's not going to be his name. But he was very clever, and he said to us, to one of the classes, he said, my advice to you for your careers is, if someone asks you if you can do something, you say you can do it. He says, and maybe you don't do a very good job the first time, but the next time you have to do it, and someone says, have you ever done this? You go, yeah, I've done that. And I think that was great advice. Don't say no. I mean, it could be within your profession. It could be someone saying to you, okay, at the the Biological Association and everything, will you chair this committee? And you don't really like committees, but you figure, okay, let me try it. Let me try chairing that committee. Because when the thing is all over, you know how to chair a committee, and you know what? There are committees in lots of different areas, right? Mm-hmm. So right. You've learned that. I don't know. That's it's be very attached to what you do. Love what you do, but be very open to detours, because sometimes they turn into highways.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Cohen. We're so happy to have you here.
I'm so thrilled. It's great to be here.